So first things first, I actually grew up in a Taekwondo dojo, and they said that we wanted to get some movement going. I didn't know if I was supposed to dance or whatever. But what I would like is for everyone to stand up, and I would like for us to share a traditional Korean Taekwondo bow. Is that okay with you guys? All right. So I'm going to say Churiet Kondo, and you guys are going to hit the sides of your legs when I say that, and then we're going to all bow together in synchrony. Sound good? Okay. Churiet Kondo! All right, take a seat. I figured with all the yoga going on, we should bring a little bit of martial arts into this. So thank you so much for having me. I'm very honored to be here. The energy in this room is pretty incredible right now. And what I want to talk about today is sort of what's happening in the world, specifically as it relates to innovation. So everywhere that you look, people are talking about startups, they're talking about disruption. It's happening all over the world. To me, it is, I think, one of the biggest trends that we're experiencing right now as a global society. And what's particularly interesting to me is the discussions that are happening behind the walls of some of the world's most powerful corporations. And for good reason. If you compare the Fortune 500 in 1959 to the Fortune 500 today, only 61 companies appear on both lists, and that's sort of pre-exponential technology. And so roughly, just over the past 50 years, roughly 90% of the companies that existed 50 years ago are now gone. And why that's important is if you look at the US GDP, roughly 73% of it is large enterprises. And the stories are all too familiar, whether it's Kodak, and their sort of rightful denial of the digital photography revolution, leaving a 132-year legacy in its wake, or Blockbuster's passing on the opportunity to buy Netflix for $50 million, and Netflix now being this $33 billion juggernaut. And so what I'm very interested in is why is it that we're so bad at predicting the future, and what can we learn about the patterns of those that came before us so that we can be better stewards of the future. And so the first part of this, and if you think of what I said previously, this is sort of before exponential technology. And so right now, traditional economic models for growth are now in direct opposition to where we sit on the exponential technology curve. And you have every major multinational corporation, and maybe more recently, some of the governments around the world that are sort of trying to understand what does it mean to live in this sort of exponential world. And from my perspective, it's not because of globalization or because of any of these things, but it's been this sort of rapid change in technology and what that actually means to the fabric of our organizations and what that means to the fabric of our global society. And so if you look at one of the interesting things, if you go back to the Industrial Revolution and you sort of look back since the beginning of humanity, for most of human history, we've actually organized in distributed fashion. People have mostly been entrepreneurs, people have been hyper-local, and sort of during the Industrial Revolution, the steam engine came along, textiles, advanced manufacturing, and so on and so forth, and created a new necessity for how to organize. And really, it's been over the past 100 years that we've started to organize in these massive monolithic structures. And so a lot of us think that big companies were the sort of creators of this modern infrastructure, but really it's the technology that preceded the organizational structures that most of us are now living in. And so as our technology shifts, we have to ask ourselves, what does that actually mean to the fundamental nature of how we organize and how productivity happens and how we live our lives? So you can look at this very simple. We're sort of starting to hit escape velocity on Moore's law, computing power becoming faster and faster and faster at an exponential rate. And you sort of look at the growth of traditional companies. So if you look at the S&P 500 over the past 100 years, it's grown at about 10% per year consistently. And so I feel that we're at a precipice as a global civilization where our organization models have been designed to work one way. They've been designed for consistent, repeatable, predictable growth. And now we're sort of experiencing exponential technology in its truest form. What's also interesting is the biggest disruption of the Industrial Revolution was actually not the technologies, but what that actually did to our working class. And so the average urban worker put in one less day of work a week and took home nearly 3 times as much pay. And so as much as we think the technology was revolutionary, it really changed the fabric of how our society was. It really created the middle class. And so one of our favorite stats at Factory is that there's also this, as this exponential technology occurs, there's this rise of this on-demand economy, and you've seen it in transportation, and you've seen it in housing, and so on and so forth. But it's now starting to hit the sort of direct center of the economy. So it's predicted by 2020 that roughly 50% of the population will operate as free agents. And so one of the things that we think about is, are we going to sort of wake up in the morning, in the future, are we going to wake up in the morning, drive in rush hour traffic, and sort of go live obediently in our cubicles? Or are we sort of going to plug into a vast digital network of projects that we can align to, where freedom and flexibility become sort of the primary means of currency? And as I like to say to a lot of our friends who are nomads and entrepreneurs and have chosen this unconventional path, it's not that we're crazy, we were just early. And so really what's happening is that whether you look at the governments or whether you look at big companies, is that these systems are unraveling, and they're unraveling faster and faster. And you can see that in the media, you can see that if you work inside of large organizations, and they're not actually geared for what's happening right now. Fundamentally, what's happening is we're moving from an industrial economy to the innovation economy. And the way I like to think of the industrial economy is that we built a society of people, of workers, of ideas that were really, really good at optimizing existing systems. So think of this as a complicated system. The difference between complicated systems and complex systems is fundamentally with complicated systems, you know where the edge of the system is. You know where the boundary conditions are. So think of a Boeing 747 plant where airplanes are needing to be moved out, and there's hundreds of thousands of parts, and the fundamental objective is to do that with as least error as possible. So Six Sigma, lean manufacturing, all these sort of things are designed to mitigate errors, right? Versus the Wright brothers and the actual creation of flight. And so what happens when we move to industrial economy? We move to an innovation economy where we don't know the boundary conditions of the system. These are complex problems. It's the economy, it's climate change, it's terrorism, it's innovation, it's all these types of things. It requires not just a little bit in terms of thinking, it's actually diametrically opposed to how we think about everything. And so that's fundamentally what we've been really interested in, is how do you sort of build the backbone of that innovation economy. So the fundamental problem that we're trying to solve at Factory is that innovation is hard, and at the core of that is actually talent. And so talent, today most brands are losing the war on talent with startups and top tech firms. Brands are responsible for relying on expensive agencies and consultancies, and there exists no simple way to connect the two. We sort of use these inefficient intermediaries. And so what we've been working on, we call it innovation on demand, and it's a network of the world's top innovators, scientists, artists, creatives, technologists, so on and so forth, that enables innovators to make money. It's an alternative to work as usual. It enables brands and governments to save money, and then it's an end-to-end solution and supply chain for creating new ideas. And so today, there exists no system, when you actually think of innovation or you actually think of creativity, there exists no system where that actually is lived. Like, there's all these creative people all over the planet, and it's completely fragmented. So what if we get all those people together and create interoperability between all of the different creatives? The innovation economy is a $1 trillion opportunity with no clear market leader. There's clearly freelancer markets. There's sort of traditional consulting industries. But really what's interesting is the conferences like this, the TEDs of the world, the Y Combinators of the world, universities, the MIT Media Labs, and so on and so forth. There's all this latent capacity around the world that needs to be activated, can be used to solve some of our biggest challenges. And so, oh, wow, I don't have a lot of time. So fundamentally, what we're really interested in, and sort of how we got started on this path, is that when you go to school, when you learn about creating a business, you start with the company first, and then you sort of find a big market, find a customer with problems, and then you hire domain experts. You put all those people into an office, and your culture sort of pops out as a byproduct, happens as a string of those decisions. And what we sort of were interested in, we said, well, what if you actually start with the culture first, and then you contain that culture into an environment, and you actually build physical space that codifies those belief systems, and then use that as a mechanism to attract the right people, and then see what products emerge, and then if the right things are happening, then you actually start the company as sort of the last step. And if you look at Apple, it started as a project in Woz and Steve's garage. If you look at Google, it was a thesis project at Stanford. If you look at Facebook, it was a project in Zuckerberg's dorm room. So most of the companies that we're trying to replicate and we're trying to go and build actually started off as passion projects. They weren't people trying to build multi-billion-dollar companies, but there was a community of people around a particular, exploring the edge of a particular domain, and that was an emergent byproduct of that system. And so innovation is very counterintuitive. So what did we do? So we built our own innovation colony. In Alamo Square, San Francisco, we bought several buildings. We actually bought the largest private residence in San Francisco. It's a 25,000 square foot mansion that we sort of retrofitted into our own innovation wonderland for creativity, inspiration, and so on and so forth. It's called Factory 1000. It was built by the Roman Church in the late 1800s. The Pope used to stay there, and we've sort of turned it into sort of a modern, nomadic place where people come and do really interesting things. And I'm not actually joking. So we think it may be one of the largest innovation experiments in history. We've done over 200 projects, 6 continents, with over 2,000 people across our innovation network around the world, with over $3 trillion worth of market cap companies working on some of the most highly secretive things in the world. Everything has been completely stealth over the past 5 years. We have a Harvard Business Review article coming out in the next few years, which is going to start sort of unveiling the cover of what we've been looking at. And fundamentally, we've been using this to amass this global network and sort of begin to index, connect, and activate all of these creatives around the world. And not only have we been building the network, we've actually been looking at in terms of like what is like the supply chain of an idea? How do you sort of start with an insight, and what are the steps that you need to go through to actually take an idea and actually turn it into something physical and actually launch it? And can you create a codified process for how to do innovation, which today is highly ambiguous, but so was sales and marketing and all these other types of concepts back in the day. Can we actually learn how to do that as a society and build a codified process around this? And so I won't get into this right now, but this is our actual process that we've built working with all of these different companies. So what we've also been building is what we call Zero. So it's our own innovation operating system. And what we noticed was that communities around the world were forming, but there was fundamentally, your summits, your TEDs, your culture conferences, so on and so forth. But fundamentally, there was no interoperability between all of those networks. And so we've been building our own innovation operating system that sits inside of some of the world's largest companies, but also sits inside some of the world's most progressive communities to connect all of those things together so we can create an efficient market around creativity and around innovation. And so if you think of your MIT Media Labs and your TEDs and your, co-working and Unreasonable and all these types of places, how do you actually get these communities connected and how do you get them working together? So I'm going to end. I'm almost finished. I'm definitely over time. But what I wanted to share, and one of the things that I found very, very important on my journey that's sort of led me to what I feel is my life's work, is this framework. And fundamentally, it's all about alignment. First, it's about finding alignment within ourselves. But then as leaders, it's about actually creating a new standard for ourselves where we demand alignment of others, and we call it when we don't see it. And so fundamentally, most of our society has actually, in terms of how we spend most of our time, has been built around the economic realm. Finding a place, finding a job where you can actually make money, and most people have had to or have chosen to optimize their life around that dimension. And that was certainly me in my last company, and I spent sort of 10 years in that domain. What I think the other 3 components that we're missing, and I think what we need to do right now, first with sort of our own local communities, but eventually the global community, is figure out how do we bring these other aspects in alignment. The second thing is genius. If you think of Michael Jordan wasn't selling tickets. He wasn't managing the team. He wasn't doing anything else other than shooting basketball. The infrastructure actually existed so that he could find his greatness. And greatness exists in all of us, but we spend so much of our time working on stuff that's not important, working on stuff that are not our gifts, trying to do things because we think it's important or because we think that's important to have society's version of success. So actually creating infrastructure that enables people to find their own gifts. Lifestyle, actually thinking about what is the actual unique lifestyle for you. For me as an entrepreneur, I realized I don't want to wake up and drive in rush hour traffic. I don't want to go sit in a cubicle. And I thought the key was actually being an entrepreneur to doing that. And then I started my own company previously, and that's exactly that's exactly what my lifestyle became. I became a prisoner of my own company, and it was because I wasn't conscious and I wasn't intentional about the inputs and the actual lifestyle I was creating when I designed that company. And the last thing is actually impact. Like, what are you actually doing? And what I see is there's a lot of people, whether you look at it nonprofits or whether you look at it as companies in Silicon Valley, that will do one of these things or two of these things. But actually, when you're designing your life and you're designing your system, considering, do I meet the criteria of all of these things so that you can get to your truest form of alignment, and then we can actually create infrastructure that enables that for every other person. So that's all I have to share. I probably took a lot longer than I should, but 10 minutes is not that much time. So I don't feel that bad. Yeah, so thank you. Yeah.